Hello, my friend. So I heard you want to go fishing for the first time and you want some friendly advice from someone you don't have to pay. I understand. As you probably know, I'm a fisherman myself. So you're probably fishing for first time for a number of reasons. Maybe you're trying to get comfortable with someone that you just met, like maybe a potential father-in-law, or you're trying to just escape the hustle and bustle of the city, or you just want to get in touch with nature. There's a number of reasons to fish. There's also a number of benefits. Uh, like, for instance, it can be very calming to fish, even if you don't catch anything. And sometimes it's the thrill. In fact, I consider fishing just another form of hunting. Now, as for me, why I fish? Well, I started fishing around when I was, I think, 14 or 15. And I did that because my dad lost his job and everyone was stressed, so we went fishing to try to calm down, and we just kind of got hooked. And now we have a lot of equipment and do it. We at least used to do it regularly. It can be a very good sport. It can also be good for exercising. For instance, I would actually gain muscle fishing, as it's not as simple as just stand there and throw a rod. That takes effort. Not to mention, when I fish, I would probably cast the rod 200 plus times if I'm using lures, which is what I will show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some common fish that you may catch and probably will aim for in this area. So you ready to learn? Great. I happen to have a book right here to help us. It may be old, but the information in it is still good. So let's begin. The first fish we're going to talk about is the largemouth bass. This is probably the most commonly fished trophy fish here in North America. Pretty much all of the tournaments, I'm going to say about 90% of the tournaments, are only for largemouth bass. A lot of people like them because they are not only are they strong fighters, but they give a spectacular show. Very often, when you're fishing for them, when you're either fishing top water or just below top water, you will see a pop when they grab your lure. And a lot of people like that. A lot of times they would just jump, and they would jump, grab it, and the fin will go right down. And a lot of people like it because of the show. And they're also very diverse in their diet, as numerous lures can and do get them. Here's my here's my tackle box. One very common thing that a lot of people use is the simple a jerk bait. This is a kind of a small one due to the tongue. But generally what you do is you fish it as if it's an injured fish. You would jerk it. It would kind of move like this, making it look like it's dying. This is very good for largemouth bass in open water. And there are other methods that we can do in, say, like like grass areas or lily pads. But generally you can catch other fishes too. I think when I'm fishing for largemouth, the best areas tend to be like at drop-offs near shores, because the bass are there to find a meal. And you generally want a big bait. This is just one I have, but I sometimes will use bigger bait, wider bait, because largemouth bass love big meals. Let's see if I have one to show you. Well, not the best example, but something like this with the tongue so it can dive down deeper. A lot of times, not just bass, but a lot of fish will go down deeper if it's warmer and too bright for some fish. But yeah, if you want to fish largemouth, these type of things will be good. And they're also pretty common. When it comes to eating them, I don't recommend it. I've eaten them even when you cook them very well. With good batter, it still tastes a little fishy. So if you're looking for an eater fish, that is not the one you should use. The next fish we will talk about is right here. Is the smallmouth bass. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't that kind of the same thing as a largemouth bass? Well, that's a common misconception. It isn't. Smallmouth bass tend to be a little smaller than largemouth, but pound for pound, they are much stronger. Now, they don't have that trademark pop, but if you want just pure fight, they are very fun to catch. I actually tend to prefer smallmouth over largemouth because not only are they hard to find, but they're much funner to reel in. I like to use a frog bait like this. I have a lot of different types of frog baits, but this is good for, say, pad crashing. Well, actually, it's not really a pad crasher, but if it's like near grass, I would use this. But if it's near lily pads, I will use this. This is a pad crasher. Smallmouth bass like frogs, and these two frogs are great for catching smallmouth bass. I tend to have better luck with this. There's a really great story that I had on a creek that I used to fish at back when I lived in Chicago. While my dad was hunting for certain fish that were near these fallen down trees, I would go up the creek where it's a little faster, and I would throw this out because sometimes in that creek you would see fish hiding in the rocks or under rocks. And it's funny because they would hide their heads in it because they operate on the logic that if they can't see you, you can't see them. And what I like to do is I like to throw this because it sinks a little bit, and go over top of them, and you would hear some, like, it's hard to hear because the creek is running, but you would hear some movement in the water, and this thing would go down, and all of a sudden something's pulling, and it's really great. And that's why I like the smallmouth, because you can get caught by surprise more because you're not always expecting it. Because it seems like smallmouth bass are not as easy to entice as largemouth bass. By the way, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a long line here with a trailer, a swivel. And I'm not going to go into detail as to why, but basically if this gets caught, I have a weaker line here, so this breaks, as opposed to this swivel. And this helps me just attach different baits on the fly. So let's talk about the next fish. Basically, with smallmouth is, again, not a great eater, but if you want a fish that's harder to find, maybe like the hunt, that's a good one to get. If you want something hard to find, then it's simple largemouth. Let's move on. Next is the striped and white bass. Now, despite their name, I don't think these are actually bass. I think they are more akin to perch, but I'm not sure. Basically, they are a lot different than your largest smallmouth variants. Now, the difference between white and striped bass is not much. They're in the same habitat and eat the same things. What's unique about them is that they tend to be much deeper in the water. I tend to find bass near the shore no more than 5 to 8 feet deep. But white bass can be, and often are, 15 to 20 feet deep, sometimes even deeper. These are good because not only can they get really big, and I'm talking big, I think that the biggest one I caught was like a 4 pounder, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but compared to the average I'm catching, that's pretty big. I think it's the highest average I have for any kind of fish, any kind of trophy fish at least. But they also tend to go in schools. Like large and smallmouth bass may hang around together, but they don't travel in schools. These do, and you find a school very often. If you have the right bait, you can catch one pretty easily. One of my favorite baits to use is the spoon. Oops. Don't want to poke myself. I catch these striped and white bass not only on spoons, but also on like artificial worms. I don't have any with me right now, but basically they're worms that are made out of rubber. Now the irony of of these type of things is, when I was younger, I didn't want to use these because I really thought these were kind of dumb. Like, there's no way a fish would fall for this. However, I used one not accidentally, but I used one out of frustration because during the day we weren't catching anything, and I caught a fish off a spoon, and since then I've been hooked. And the reason is because they twist and move as if they are an injured fish. And as you would probably guess, if you're trying to entice a fish as another fish, fish really like injured fish because they're easiest to get. So basically, if you want to catch a white bass, that's a good thing to use. Another thing to use, which could be used for any of the bass as well as many other fish, a good thing to use is the spinner. And you've probably have seen these before. These will work for pretty much not only all types of bass, but really a lot of fish too, but they're mainly used for bass. They're good because they're shiny and loud. You can probably hear the ringing. I'm guessing it's amplifying the water because I never understood how you can hear this. But this is good for white bass, which I've actually never caught a white bass off this, but I do know somebody who has. However, I have caught other bass off these type of things. So this is something to keep in mind as just a general all-purpose tool. This is mainly for open water, as you're not going to want to have this in the weeds. Essentially, when it comes to hunting, if you can find a white bass school, and have the right bait for that day, it's fairly easy to catch one. They are decent fighters, either one, white or striped. The only difference is if you don't have a radar system, finding a school could prove difficult. But if you do have a radar system or have somebody who does have one, then that would be a good one to hunt. They tend to like to go deep. But if you're not into that kind of thing, then it's probably not fish for you. When it comes to eaters, they taste pretty good. Not only are they pretty dense, so they have a lot of meat for their size, but it smokes really well and fries really well. So if you want to eat the fish you catch, that's a good one to do. On to the next fish. Alright, when it comes to size, this might be a little disappointing compared to what we've gone over, but I think it's important to go over it anyway. The sunfish. And in the sunfish, there are three types. The bluegill, which is very common, the red ear, which is not as common, but more common in the south, and the pumpkin seed, not pumpkin spice. They, I think, are more common in the north. When it comes to size, obviously they're a bit small. The largest one I caught, I think, was like 10 inches, maybe. No, not even that. But not only are they easy to find, but if you have light rods, like for instance really super light, they can provide a great fight. Now obviously going in with a medium or heavy rod, well, if you're going medium rod, you'll just reel it in as if nothing's there, and if you're going heavy rod, you just lift it out, probably fling out of the water. But there are several reasons to fish for them. A big one I used to do is I go to the creek, the same one I'm talking about, use worms and fish for them small ones to use for bait for larger fish. And if you can fish for a while and have the patience, that's a great way to do it. You have to find really small ones, like your regular size ones won't do that very well. Now when it comes to baits, I've not had really luck with artificial baits for them because of how small they are. So the best way to do it would just be get a hook, a bobber, and some worms. And really that's the only thing you'll need to catch some sunfish. Now when it comes to the differences, there's not really any differences among the three. The bluegill's the common one. If you want to hunt, then if you're in the north, pumpkin seeds is what you'll look for. South, you would look for red ear. I think red ear actually get a little bigger than bluegills. Now, when it comes to eaters, they taste pretty good. The only issue is it can be hard to find eaters because they only get to a certain size. So you really have to be selective with them. And it becomes a real mess if you have a krill limit in that lake. But if you're looking for solid eaters, as well if you just want to catch a fish, if you want to catch fish, you don't care what kind, go after sunfish. Because they're far easier to find, as pretty much 99% of them you'll find will be near the surface, near the shore. And they'll be easy to find in the day. I've not had much luck finding them at night or when it's cloudy. So if it's a sunny day, go look for some sunfish. On to the next fish. Alright, what we got here? Alright, here's a classic. Next we have the crappie. The crappie or crappie, depending on where you're from. Now there are two variants, the black crappie and the white crappie, but they're really not. They're really the same. I haven't noticed a difference. They're in the same areas basically, and the same techniques work for both. Now these are fairly common as well. In fact, me and my father would pretty much this was the number one fish we would catch because they're easy to find. They put a decent fight for their size, and they taste pretty good. Now they're not as common as bluegills because some days we can just try and not catch any. Now when it comes to lures, this also ranges good. Certain spoons work, but I'll show you the spoons. These things. Now, first off, they have to be kind of small because they're significantly smaller than your bass. But this is what we call a vertical spoon. Generally, with spoons, you do a horizontal, means you cast it and you retrieve it. This, what you do in a boat specifically, is you go over where the nests are, and with this you don't really need radar because a lot of lakes will have nest maps or artificial nests where the crappie will be. What we would do is drop it down and then jerk it up. It looks like it's a fish hanging in suspension. And the reason we want it above the fish is because with any fish really, where their eyes are located, they look up. They can't really see down. So what we do is we have it above them, and it looks like a fish is struggling, and they go up and eat it. There are many good methods to catch crappie. The two best ways are either a minnow on a hook with a bobber or with a spoon. If I'm fishing for crappie specifically that day, I would do both. I'll have one rod with a bobber and jig this to keep it on my rods. I've fished in some states and some lakes. You can have 3 rods per person. Some you can have 2. So it really depends on the lake. If I'm able to, I'll have 2 bobbers out with the spoon. When it comes to how rare, they're not that rare. They're probably a little easier to find than bass, but nowhere near as easy as sunfish. They are really good eaters, taste really good. So if you want to eat a fish, I highly recommend crappie. You can catch a lot. In fact, one day when I was ice fishing, I think back in 2014 with my dad, we combined caught over 160 of them. It was an insane day. 160 in an hour. That's really good. So if you can find a school of them, you could catch a number and really reach your krill limit. And in many lakes, the krill limit is fairly large. It's actually kind of small. Like the lake I go to here where I live, the krill limit I think is 40, which if I find a school I can meet that pretty in a couple of hours. So crappie. On to the next fish. Sorry about that. Having a little issue with my book. Next we have is the perch. Perch don't tend to be very big, especially up north. Like when I fished in Chicago, Illinois, obviously, the perch were kind of small. The biggest one I caught was like 10 inches, maybe. The also problem is that up north they're kind of thin. They're kind of warm water fish, I guess. Unfortunately, this is the one fish I don't really know how to catch because when I catch them, it's generally when I'm going after other fish. It's really hard to target these fish. So I don't really have any info. If you happen to catch one, because I've caught them in so many different methods, and if it's good and if it's a good size, keep it. They're really good. If I had to say rarity, I say I don't know. I'm not sure if they're rare or not. I just don't have any luck with them. So I do not recommend targeting them because I think you'd have a hard time finding them. But if you happen to catch one, keep it and take a picture. So the next fish I want to talk about is a very classic one that a lot of people seem to love. Is the catfish. And even if you're not a fisherman, you probably know what catfish is. Here are the numerous different types. Catfish are very common in pretty much every lake in America, in North America, really. What's great about them is that they're big. They're really, really big fish. Probably the biggest one, well, not the biggest ones, but one of the biggest fish you will catch. Not to mention, they're not technically trophy fish. So if you want to see if you can catch as many as you can, you can. I rarely see a krill limit for any kind of catfish on any kind of decent sized lake. Of course, on a small lake, you'll get a krill limit anyway. What their type of fight is a little different than what you get from, say, bass, and you have to be prepared for this. A lot of times when I hook a catfish, I think I hooked a log, because that happens sometimes. You hook a log and you lose your bait. That happens. But the thing is, you don't pull a log. Unlike bass, which once they grab and they hook, they fight and try to get away from you. Catfish are kind of lunks, where they think that if they get hooked, they just lay down on the ground and have you drag them. They don't start fighting until maybe they're towards where they think their destination is, whether it be your boat or the shore. Then they start fighting. They're not really big fighters, but the problem is that you can catch one, and when they're big, they can be very heavy. The biggest one I ever caught was when I lived in St. Louis. It was 8 pounds, and that thing almost dislocated my shoulder. And I think it was like 13 at the time. That was the first time I ever fished, and I still haven't matched it. I've caught some 6-pounders, but yeah, these things can get otherworldly. The blue cats are the biggest. I have not caught one yet because when I fished in the south, I had no luck, and by the time I lived up north and got better at fishing, blue catfish are not as common in the north. Now, when it comes to lures, you don't need a lure. Just need a big hook, some smelly bait, and you'll get a catfish. What I used to do is I used to catch some smaller, like bluegills, and if they did not survive till my next fishing trip, I would let them rot in the sun and use them as bait for catfish. It works every time. That's actually very effective. If you want to catch a big fish easily, go for the catfish. Another thing the only thing I would say is that they are sharp. Their spines hurt especially because I think they have some kind of not venom, but some kind of chemical that makes it hurt more than it normally does, and it does. But there are not as many of them, and the one interesting about them is that they make a really weird grunting noise when you catch them. When you pick them up by the mouth, they go ar 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 ar, and it's kind of funny. When it comes to taste, it can vary from lake to lake. If it's a clean lake, it will taste kind of like what you get from a farm grown catfish. If it's a dirty lake or muddy lake, it will taste a little bit more earthy, which I don't mind, but a lot of people do. So if you're looking to eat a lot of fish, I say go for a catfish. And probably my favorite type of fish, the walleye. Walleyes are unique fish as they are not quite like a lot of other fish, as the methods you have to use to find them are a little different. You also have the sauger here, and honestly, I've only caught one sauger, I think, which was kind of small. I don't think there's any difference between them and the walleye. The only difference is I think saugers are more common in the south, but I don't know. But basically, they're the same fish. Now, one thing about walleye is that they are hard to find. As you can tell, this is my favorite fish for a couple of reasons. One, they're hard to find, and two, they taste the best of the fish. And it's not so much that they are hard to catch, because there's a number of lures you can use, but they're just hard to find. They move around a lot, and they're not always in the same place from day to day, as opposed to a lot of other fish. Another thing is their habitat and their adaptation. Like, for instance, their eye is really sensitive. If you've seen one, the light shines in their eye like some kind of crystal ball. They have really sensitive eyes, so they tend to go very deep. But when it's dark, they will rise up to the near the surface. Now, when it comes to lures, one thing I like to use near rocks is a crawdad bait. Crawdad baits are just like what they sound. They mimic the movement of a crawdad. Now, one thing I find interesting is that this is on reverse, but yeah, crawdads swim backwards, I guess. Who knew? Blue is also a good one. Let's see if I have my blue one here. Doesn't look like I have my blue one, but yeah, I use my white and or blue one depending on what's going on today. And I can if I find one, I can catch them. I don't catch that many because they're kind of hard to find. Some days, if I just want to catch fish, I won't go after them at all. It's really hard to accidentally catch one. But they're very good fighters. In fact, one interesting thing about them that you definitely want to know is that if you think you hooked one, do not put your net into the water unless it's like right there and you can scoop it up. Because what will happen is they'll inevitably see that net and it will shoot down. And sometimes it will break your line or pop it off. And that's why I have leaders, because they have sharp teeth. And the last thing I want to do is lose a lot of line. So I just have a leader here so I don't lose my swivel. As these swivels are are good for switching your baits on the fly. Because without them, I have to tie each one of these to the line, and I just don't want to do that. These crawdads are actually not just good for walleyes, but they also work for, I've caught catfish and bass off them. So these are very versatile because a lot of fish like crawdads. When it comes, like I said, when it comes to hunting them, they're probably the hardest to find within reason, because they don't have a habitat. With all the other fish that I have talked about or will talk about, you can pretty much predict where they'll be, but with walleye, it's really hard to do that as they move around a lot. And the weirdest thing is they move around in schools, but they're not like white bass. You can't just catch them over and over again like you can with white bass. They taste the best too. But yeah, basically, the walleye is my favorite fish. It's hard to hunt for, and it tastes really good. I don't recommend you going after it if you want to catch a lot of fish, but if you have a radar and are looking for the thrill of the hunt, that's good fish to get. Now we have essentially one more fish type to talk about, even if there are two, but they're essentially the same. The pike and muskie. Now, I'm going to mostly talk about the pike since I've never actually caught a muskie. I've hooked one, but I've never caught one. Besides, going after muskie is a different animal. Now, with pike, they are fairly long and big. If you want a big fish, there's really no other bigger fish than the pike and the muskie. Pike being smaller, but you can catch them with the equipment you use for every other fish. Muskie, you will essentially need new equipment. So unless you've just want to hunt for muskie specifically, I'm not going to. I can't say that you're going to find one. I've only accidentally hooked into one and haven't caught it. You really have to hunt for those. But pike can be just as fun, and I have a few lures that might help you find some. Now, unlike muskies, pike like to hang around the shore surprisingly, along with lily pads. There are different types of lures I like to use. In the open water, I can use a big spoon like this. As you can see, it is significantly bigger than the spoons I showed earlier. They like spoons a lot. I think they like to rattle too. And if I'm going in the weeds, I would sometimes use a weedless spoon. This little, this is supposed to track them, but there's this little elastic here that keeps it from getting snagged on weeds. Now it's hard to explain how that works, but basically that's why that's there, to prevent it from getting stuck in the weeds. Now, in thick lily pads, I like to use my big pad crasher, although I don't think it's any bigger than this. No, it's not. But they tend to like lighter colors, it looks like. And my personal weapon for pike, the frog with the spinner legs. These make a lot of noise. These are good for if I'm going in and out of lily pads. Pike can be easy to find, but not always easy to hook, as they can be a little finicky on when and what they want to eat. Now, I know you can catch them on like big jerkbait lures, but I haven't had any luck with them. I tend to prefer the ones that are upshore. I think if it's warm in the day or sunny, they will be close to shore in the lily pads. And they're pretty good eaters, but just make sure you get ones that have girth to them, because I've caught some that are thin, they're a pain to gut. Now, along with muskie, pike have a problem with krill limit, not with the number, but with the size. The problem with fish is that it makes sense that you can't eat fish that are too small, but you really can't eat fish that are too big. And the reason for that is age. As a fish gets older and bigger, its muscles start to not deteriorate, but be compromised, and the lactic acid, I think, builds up and makes it not as good to eat. So you don't want a fishing lake that has a really big keep limit. I'd say you want one that has a keep limit of 24. That's a good area to aim for, because if you get one that's like 32, by that fish is gonna be too old to bother eating. Now, when it comes to muskie, I would not I'm not the person to ask for that, since I don't fish for them, because you kind of need different equipment. If you go look up like muskie baits, they are much bigger than what I would have. Like something that's this big, very bigger, and the rods are insane. Like it's definitely a different, it's a different game when you're going for muskie. And if you're going to eat them, and I like to eat fish, you definitely don't want to fish for muskie because the krill limits are insane. The lake I used to fish at in Chicago had a krill limit of 48 inches. I'm not gonna eat a fish that big or that old. But of course, it's probably the best fish for a photo, as you literally cannot pick it up with one hand. They're too heavy and too big. But yeah, when it comes to pike, if you like eating and big fish, that's a good one to go after. And they're not easy to find, but easier than, say, your walleye or your white bass if you don't have a radar. And that really concludes what I want to talk about. There's also river fishing. In America, the salmon and the trout are very common river fish, but I don't river fish. You need a completely new setup. There's really 3 types of fishing. Well, 4. You have your soft water fishing, basically your lakes and creeks. Hard water fishing, that'd be ice fishing, which we can discuss if you really want to another day. Your musky fishing, yeah, say more, and your river fishing. And that requires a whole new setup because you have to do fly fishing, which is a lot different than what we're doing here. But I hope I helped you. Now, keep in mind, I am not a paid professional. I do not do this for a living, but I do this as a hobby, and I'm pretty serious about it. So I hope I helped you, and I like helping people in this area because I was once in this area, and a lot of people helped me for no cost. And since I'm a friend, I will not require any cost. I'm just here helping. So, do you have any idea of how you want to do this? Alright. Well, doesn't matter if you go by yourself or not, just remember to wear your life vest because that is important. Well, I hope you have fun and you have good luck. Bye. Hello my friends, thank you for watching. If you like these videos, please subscribe to be notified when I post, and actually click the bell to actually be notified when I post. If you have any suggestions for any future roleplays, movie reviews, or rambles, please comment down below, and if it's a big request, please email me. My address will be in the description below. If you want to see updates to my uploads, as well as my cultural hot takes, please follow me on Twitter. And until the next video, thank you very much for watching, and God bless.